Hey, this is Peter Timberlake. I'm a compositor and director working out of Southern California. So I've recently put online a bunch of practice material that compositors can download and get started with. And these are intended for compositors who want to improve their reel using kind of high quality practice material, or people who are just wanting to do tutorials online and have something to do the tutorials with. And you can access these by going to petertimberlake.com/practice material. Within each of these shots will be all of the plates required to do this shot. We'll see up here on the top, there's a video of this kid running by this lady really fast. So the boy goes in fast motion, and then everything behind him, the lady, the flags, the tablecloth, etc., blows in slow motion. To achieve that, you're going to need a handful of plates, including the boy, the lady, the tablecloth, and then some auxiliary things such as matte painting elements, CG flags, and then the roto for the boy. And this is all contained and downloadable here. You just click download here, and it's designed so that you can just simply download it and then chuck it into Nuke and get started. If that's what you do want to do, make sure to convert your project color space from Nuke default to ACES 1.1. We'll go over that in just a second. So the reason I've done this is just because it's really hard to find accessible, good quality practice material that's not prohibited by either the movie studios or agencies or brands or what have you. So these are completely free to use, no license, use them, abuse them, do whatever you want with them. So the Foundry have asked me to kind of put together a demo video on how to get started with these practice plates. So we're not going to actually go over all of the individual techniques needed to complete these shots. We will be going over kind of the problem solving that you're going to need to use over and over throughout your career, and that can enable you to solve problems not only on these shots, but on every shot you ever do in your whole compositing career. If you are curious about where to find the more technical specific knowledge, you can do that just on either Foundry's YouTube page, so Foundry Nuke, and you can find the Foundry's page here, or you could just search a particular technique that you might be interested in learning, such as say about a grade node. You can just say grade node Nuke. There's going to be a lot of people very eager to share what they know. Anytime you encounter a problem, go to Google first. Without further ado, here's the skills that we're going to be going over in this video as we kind of build this shot. 1. Use what you have in your brain to solve problems. And what that means is you already know all kinds of stuff, and you probably even know a lot of stuff about graphics and compositing. So our goal is going to be to use the things that we already know to kind of triangulate the things that we don't know and ask the questions that we need to be asking. 1B, Google stuff relentlessly. Once you kind of figure out the problem that you're trying to solve, just Google it exhaustively and read as much as you can. Probably a lot of the answers you're going to be getting are from people who are experienced in the compositing world, who are eager to share their knowledge with you. And 1C, when Google fails, ask people on forums and Discord. If you've spent a lot of time Googling your problem, you can't figure out the answer, just ask people on the Foundry forums, Nuke users, or ask on Discord. And there's a handful of Discord servers. One of them I created and run. It's called a Nuke Coven here. And as you can see, there's people asking questions about various things here. Skill set number 2, use references as often as possible. In every comp, we're going for a ground truth perfect comp. In order to get there, we're going to need to use real world references. Say for example, we want to replace a sky and our sky is not looking perfect. We're going to go online and look at some images and videos of the thing that we're trying to create, and then we're going to use the information that we learn from that reference video to solve problems within our comp. Number 3, there's tons of information in the plate. Use it. When we composite an element into a plate, all of the information that we need to know about how that element should look is contained within the original footage itself. Say for example, we want to match the color of something white in our CG element to something white in the comp. We need to be able to access that information in the plate itself, the footage that we shot, and then apply that to our new composited element. And we'll go over that more in a second. Number 4, always assume there's a way to improve your comp until time runs out. In other words, we need to learn how to critique our own work and be really relentless against our comps, while always being confident in our ability to improve that comp and also improve our own work. And that skill is at the core of compositing, and it's going to be the process by which you improve your eye and improve yourself as a compositor. And number 5, find mentorship where you can. Even if it's not called formally a mentor-mentee relationship, find folks that can provide wisdom to you, and then just try and absorb as much as you can from them. Okay, and the last thing we do before getting into these comps is let's please download the Tony Lyons Survival Toolkit. And you can find this on GitHub under Creative Lions Nuke Survival Toolkit. And this is going to contain a lot of tools that aren't installed with Nuke, but that have been developed by Nuke users over the last 10 to 20 years, and they're used in studios all around the world. In order to install this, please just watch this demo video or the instruction manual here, and we'll be using these throughout this demo video. Okay, if all you'd like to do is just throw these into Nuke and start compositing, all you'll have to do is just download these, chuck them in like so, and then change your color space settings, and then get started. Change your color space settings here by going Color Management, OCIO, OCIO Config, ACES 1.1, and that will give you the correct color space for your read node, which is ACES CG. Scene Linear and ACES CG are the same color space while in the ACES OCIO config, and this will be everything you need to get started. Okay, so Foundry have also asked me to put together a quick demo on Nuke Studio and how you can use Nuke Studio to manage your entire project. So the last thing you'd want to do if you're working on a personal project or a client project is complete your edit in Premiere, then export plates out of Premiere, and then kind of just hope that everything goes right. I mean, I've seen a lot of studios do this, and it always ends up in a lot of heartbreak and a lot of stress for everyone involved and a lot of late nights. To solve this problem, Foundry have created Nuke Studio, which is kind of the starting place and ending place for every VFX project. So the way that we would start this process, we would export an XML from our editorial software like Premiere or Resolve or Avid or whatever, and import it into Nuke. And what we would get is something that looks like this, a timeline. And this timeline is composed of, firstly, all of our plates that compose this edit in a timeline, and then also all of the ingredients needed to put together these composites. For a shot like this, where our boy is running across the frame in fast motion and everything in the background is going in slow motion, we're going to need a handful of plates. We're going to need the boy running, obviously, in fast motion. We're going to need some slow motion tablecloth here, and slow motion lady's hair getting blown up like so. And so our goal for this is going to be to create a project folder structure that our compositors, in our case probably ourselves, can work within and export within in a really organized way so that everything is being named correctly and everything is being put in the correct folders, so that we can then later pick all of this stuff back up in Nuke Studio with just a single push of a button. So in order to achieve that goal, we're going to need to name stuff in a specific way. We will just go through our project and name things sequentially, SC10, 20, 30, 40, and make sure that our tracks are named in a meaningful way. In our case, BGO1, BGO2, BGO3, which is short for background 1, 2, and 3. And then make sure that all of our vertical ingredients here, our elements, are named the same way. I mean, we can do that naming pretty easily by just sequentially naming everything. By going to editorial, rename shots, sequential rename, start at shot 10, and then here's our pattern, and we can increment by 10. So our first shot will be called SH0010. The following shot will be incremented by 10, meaning SH0020, and so on. And so what that will create is shot SH0010 all the way to SH0530 for 53 total shots. Imagine that we have named everything correctly. We've named our sequence correctly, SEQ010. I would recommend something kind of short so that your file paths aren't too long, and then we'll hit export. Okay, and then what we'll see as an export structure here, this is one that I've created. Foundry have also preloaded Nuke Studio with some other export templates that you can use, but at the end of the day, you'll probably want to change this a file structure that works for you. So this is going to export a handful of things. Firstly, it will export your plates as EXRs, which is key that you're working on EXRs and not an MOV or MP4, and it will name these files according to the tokens that you've provided Nuke Studio. Firstly, we will get a bunch of folders here. You can create as many enclosing folders as you wish, and then we'll have this bracket here, which will denote a sequence. So instead of writing sequence within our file path, you'll see that in our example preview here, we don't get the word sequence, we get the phrase SEQ010, which is our sequence name here. Basically, Nuke Studio is replacing this sequence token with whatever our sequence is named. Next is our shot. Our shot is named SH0070, so we'll see here SH0070. Our track, BGO1. Our version is pulling from right here, 0001, and our extension, which is the file type. So when we look at what EXR sequence Nuke Studio is going to be writing, we can see our sample path here, and then we have all of our settings here. One of the other things Nuke Studio is going to be creating is a Nuke project file, which contains your read node. The read node is going to look something like this, where it's pulling directly from the file path from Nuke Studio, this read node, and a write node, which has a pre-filled write path within whatever folder structure you like. Nuke Studio will also be looking to repopulate the edit with completed VFX work from that write path. So according to these tokens, here is where our Nuke project file is going to be created. And then finally, you will denote the output path of your write node within Nuke according to this Nuke write node output structure. All this means is when you do create that Nuke file, the write node that is created within that Nuke script will be auto-populated to write to this this path. And in turn, when our VFX work is completed, Nuke Studio will be looking for that right path to repopulate its edit with completed VFX work. Okay, so let's hit export here. And after that export completes, what we'll see is 53 discrete shot folders here for our 53 shots, as well as all of the requisite plates for those shots that we selected during our export. So for a shot like this, shot 70, we'll see BGO1, BGO2, BGO3, which correlate to BGO1, BGO2, BGO3. So now that we've exported our plates and had our Nuke scripts pre-generated, let's get started with compositing. So in the case of someone who's just downloading stuff off my website, you can just chuck these into Nuke and pretty much get started. Likely when you first pull in plates, this is how our comp is going to look. Not great. The colors look a little bit flat and a little bit greenish, and that's just because Nuke is interpreting these in the incorrect color space. And in order to fix that, we'll just hit S on our keyboard, go to project settings. We'll ensure color management is set to OCIO, and OCIO config is set to ACES 1.1. And that will ensure that our read nodes are automatically set to ACES CG. ACES CG and scene linear in the ACES OCIO config are the same, so we can switch between scene linear and ACES CG and we'll see that they look the same. That will put us in a good place to start our compositing work. Okay, so I just opened shot 60 here. We'll be working with both shot 60 and 70, but we'll start with shot 60. We'll see that we want to composite both this running boy here and this lady airing out the laundry here. What we'll notice first is that the shot is not stable. It's not on a tripod. And not only that, but the motion isn't the same for each shot. If we were just to do kind of a cheap over here, we would notice that the backgrounds are moving a ton against each other. Okay, so let's use our first concept of compositing. We'll use what's in our head to solve problems. So we know that if something is moving and it has a different motion than the element that we're compositing on top of, we're going to get a lot of swimming where one of the elements is swimming against the other element. So let's kind of use what's in our brain and diagnose. So what if we stabilized each of the plates before doing our compositing work? That way we would have one plate that's stable, another plate that's stable, and then we could just smack them on top of each other. We have kind of problem solved using our own brain, but what if we don't know how to stabilize an image? Well, we'll use our second concept, 1B, Google stuff, and we'll say how to stabilize in Nuke. And what we'll see is a bunch of different walkthroughs on how to stabilize. I'll give you a shortcut right now. We could just use a simple tracking node, tracker. We could create a bunch of tracking points using Control-Alt-Click, something like this general plane, highlight them all and track. Grab all of these, just indicating to Nuke that we want to use the transform motion in X and Y and the rotation information that's rotating like so, and we will stabilize baked. So we'll notice that it's kind of working, but we still have a lot of swimming over here in the extremities, right here, and up here on the left, right here, we're getting a lot of swimming. So say we've Googled a lot of solutions to this problem and we haven't been able to find anything. One of the next steps we can take is strategy 1C. When Google fails, ask people on the forums and Discord. So we could go to the Foundry forums here, Nuke users, or we could go to the Discord here. So this Discord is a Discord that I created and is run by some really cool people, and people are very charitable with their information, with their time here. If we're a new user, we can use this new users thread and we can just ask our question. We'll probably want to include a screenshot of our problem and maybe even a video of what's not working, and maybe explain things that we've tried and ask for some potential solutions to our problem. Okay, so let's leave this shot behind now and move on to a new shot. This is going to be shot 70. So when getting started with this, the first step we'll probably take is we'll take a look at all of our elements, we'll play them through just to kind of see what's going on with them, and then we'll build a list in our mind of how these elements need to be built up from back to front. So one kind of best practice is to build your comp from the furthest element back and then build it sequentially of each element in space forward. If we take a look at all of our elements here, we'll conclude that probably the furthest back in every single comp we ever do in our whole life will be the sky. So sometimes what I'll do when starting a comp is I will just create an empty reformat node at the correct format that we're compositing within, and that will just set us on the right path moving forward. Create an empty reformat node, set it to the same format as our plate, and then we'll get going. So our furthest element back here is the sky. Let's just merge that over our empty reformat, and here's what we'll get. So this doesn't really look super usable, so we'll just position this something something like that, just as a starting place before we merge our other elements over. And then as you can see, our bounding box here is really large, and this just means that we're only seeing this in our viewport, but Nuke is actually calculating all of this data here, meaning it's calculating 4 times more data than what we actually need it to be calculating. So let's just crop that here, and that will ensure that Nuke only calculates what's in the viewport. Okay, our next furthest element back would be this drone plate, but for now let's just skip that one and go straight to our next furthest in space, just for time. Okay, so we have first our boy. That's not further back than the lady, is it? And then we have this tablecloth here, which is going in front of the lady's knee. So we would conclude that our next furthest back element would be the lady getting her hair blown like so. One thing I'll actually do before compositing this over is I want to white balance this plate. And that's just because this doesn't look super white balanced to me. It looks very orange. And this is something that we probably wouldn't do at a studio, but in this case we can. And we'll just treat this white balance as a so-called neutral grade that we're going to do some of our compositing work within, knowing that if we want to, we can reverse that neutral grade later to get back to our original color. So I'll go tab and type in white balance TL. And if this doesn't appear for you right away, this is because this is part of the Tony Lyons survival toolkit. If it doesn't appear for you, that means it's not installed or it's not installed correctly. And you can confirm that it's installed correctly. If you can see this little red Swiss Army knife here, that means it's installed correctly. And if you can't, it means it's not installed correctly. Just to confirm, you'll go to GitHub Creative Lions Nuke Survival Toolkit and you'll follow the download and install instructions there. So to get started with this white balance tool, let's just disable it and let's pick a kind of neutral area of the frame that we think should be true white. Let's say right here. And then we'll re-enable. And that looks a lot more like true white to me. If we go back and forth, this looks very orange where this looks very much more white. And that's what we're after. The reason that you disable this while I'm working with the color picker, if we think about it, we're using this color picker to choose a value which then changes the overall look of the comp. If we keep this enabled and then we try and color pick like so, we're going to be getting lots of changes because it's adapting to the new look. So we'll just disable this while we pick our color and then re-enable it after the color is picked. So like we said earlier, we can treat this white balance as a so-called neutral grade, meaning that we can grade it to be more neutral, having confidence that whenever we want, we can invert that neutral grade later. So imagine we have our neutral grade here, and then we do a bunch of compositing work. We know that we can always grab this, put it at the bottom later, and then reverse it. And then if we check between this reversed neutral grade and our original plate, we can have confidence that these two look the same. So you can kind of set this neutral grade to kind of whatever. I mean, it should look kind of neutral and normal, knowing that we can reverse it later. I might actually dial this back to around like something like this, just to give it a little bit more of that kind of warmth, but not too far. So here's the difference between our original plate and our neutral grade. And then while we're at it, we might as well copy this neutral grade to our other two plates here. So let's make our next step merging over this plate over our sky. So we'll want to effectively remove this sky, and we can oftentimes do that with a simple Luma key here, and then we'll hit A to view our plate here. The white areas are areas that get past an alpha, so let's invert this so that our buildings are now white. And then we'll just dial in our key here, and we'll want to go for something where the edges are not too sharp, because sharp edges in general kind of look ugly, knowing that we'll probably need to fill this out with a bit of supplementary roto. O for roto node, and then I'll just fill in the areas that kind of got missed by the key. And when I use roto, I almost always use this B-spline option just because it's much more flexible than using the Bezier. And to ensure we don't have any kind of sharp roto edges, a lot of times I'll also just take this and hit E to feather out these edges, ensuring that we don't have any kind of stray edges like so. And our alpha is looking a lot fuller now, which is what we want. So you'll notice that nothing changed perceptually here for the RGB, and that's because we need to pre-multiply here. Pre-multiplication, you can find tutorials on this. All it means is we multiply the values in our alpha by the values in our RGB. We have 0 alpha up here, meaning the RGB here will be 0. We have 1 values right here, meaning the RGB will be the same value that it used to be before. And what that gives us is this transparent image. If we wanted to truly do our due diligence on this shot, we would use an additional key for this area here, or just, it wouldn't take long to just roto out these buildings here. For the sake of time, we'll just leave these as is. So let's merge over our building here. Here's what we'll get. So we might think to ourselves, okay, that kind of accomplished our goal. We're getting a lot more detail and saturation in the sky, but our eye might kind of tell us, this looks kind of weird. I don't really know why it looks weird, but if I was watching this in a movie, I would definitely be able to tell that this sky was not real. So let's do ourselves a favor and check out some reference images to see if we can kind of diagnose why this might be looking kind of strange. So let's just go out to Google Images and I'll just search. We shot this in Skopje, Macedonia, so I'll just search Skopje, Macedonia, then I'll just look for some images of Skopje. When searching for references, there's always going to be some that are really heavily color corrected, and those are going to be images that we want to avoid. Images like this, something like this is extremely color corrected, so we'll want to find something a little bit more natural. Something like this, let's just try and kind of describe what we see in the sky to help us help our comp a little bit. So if I'm describing this sky, I'll say it looks super blue near the top of the frame, and then as we go further toward the horizon, we get a little bit more brightness and a little bit less saturation, a little bit more white and a little bit less fully blue. Okay, so if we kind of go through some of these images, we'll probably start to form a pattern here where the same rules hold true. See something like this where we have blue saturation near the top of the frame, and as we go further toward the horizon line, we get less saturation and more brightness, and then probably each and every other image we'll probably see something similar. Here's a cool example where we have blue near the top of the frame, then as we go toward the horizon line, we almost get this kind of pinkish, magenta-ish hue, but also a little bit more brightness. Okay, so let's take what we learned here and apply it to our comp. Compared to our comp, a lot of those images were, one, a lot less saturated than the sky. The sky is extremely saturated. And two, near the horizon line, we would expect a lot more brightness. This is looking pretty dark. The first step we'll probably take is to just adjust the positioning of this HDRI so that we're getting a little bit more of a natural positioning of our sky. Maybe scale up a touch. One step we could also take is increase the brightness of the horizon line even a touch more. We may be able to bring the luminance of this top of the sky down a touch relative to the sky. So I'll just grab this area near the horizon line and feather this out a bit, probably gamma this up a touch, maybe gain up a touch, and then we'll do pretty much the opposite to the top of the sky. Let's grab a cusp rectangle here, feather it out down. We might be able to gamma down a touch, maybe even bring up the blue and green a touch. I might also just overall multiply up a bit, and we are looking pretty cool. Okay, so let's compare our sky now to the sky we had before. We have achieved our goal of providing more detail to the sky while also staying true to the references that we found online. Okay, so if we're using our rule of compositing in order of Z depth, the next element we'll probably want to composite will be this tablecloth here. As you can see, it goes over her leg, meaning it's going to be in front of the lady. And then finally, our boy plate here. For the time being, we'll leave these to you to composite completely, and we'll move on to our flag element. Let's just do our quick A over B here and see how it's coming in. As you can see, it comes in transparent, and this is due to a kind of embarrassing problem caused by myself. I basically rendered this in my spare time and I didn't render it with an alpha, and I didn't really have time to fix it. So we can use this opportunity to lean into some real world experiences. If you had a better lighter at a studio, this would definitely come in with an alpha, but considering our lighter is a total novice, it's coming in without an alpha. We can see here that we'll be able to probably pretty quickly key this, and we will pre-mult to multiply our alpha by our RGB. And as you can see now, we have our complete transparency along with our RGBA. But the first thing you'll notice is that this is looking kind of insane. We'll use our next strategy to figure out why it might look so insane. So that's strategy 3. There's tons of information in the plate, use it. So let's take a look at our plate here and compare it against our CG element. So the first thing we might notice is that this red here is looking extremely bright and extremely saturated. And the reason we're keying into that so fast is because we have a direct comparison of what this color of red should look like because of this red umbrella right here. So we know that this red umbrella is really what we should be aiming for, and this red looks totally different from it. So that's an example of how we use the information in the plate to determine what our composited element should look like. The next thing you're probably noticing is that this white looks very neutral, whereas this one has a touch of kind of orange in there. You'll also notice that this beam of light here is causing this area to be super bright, and then it casts a shadow right here which is pretty dark, which isn't being reflected in our CG element. We would expect that these flags should be pretty dark by comparison to the flags on the left here. We also might notice that the focus here is mismatched, where we have a pretty soft out of focus element here, whereas these flags are very sharp. We also might notice that our chromatic aberration and our lensing is very different, where we have this orange edge here and this turquoise cyan edge here, which is also not being reflected in the CG. Lastly, we have this pretty extreme technical flaw where we have these extremely dark edges around our CG, which we're also going to need to solve. We'll also probably key in on the fact that these are very noisy coming out of Redshift. Okay, so we've kind of keyed into the information that is in our plate that we're going to need to apply to our CG element. So let's go ahead and get started with doing that. So maybe one of the first things I'll do is I'll address the luminance difference between our shadowed area on the plate and the same area in our CG. So I'll just grab a grade node here and a matte. I'll just grade down the side of the CG. One thing you'll notice as we grade this down is that we are getting a lot less brightness, luminance off these, but it still looks kind of wrong. And that's because we still have a lot of contrast in these. In an area like so, where she's getting hit by a direct ray of light from the sun, which is tucked behind this building here, and then she falls off into shadow relatively quickly, creating this high contrast area. When things aren't getting hit by direct light, they're only getting hit by reflected light, we don't get those areas of high contrast because they're not getting hit by a direct light source. So that's something that we're going to need to address here. Again, this probably should have been addressed in lighting by our terrible lighter, myself, but we have to deal with the situations presented to us. So the quickest way to kind of get rid of some of this contrast is just to bump up the gamma and then bump up the black point a bit, and then we'll put our pre-molt under our grade here. We'll just need to continue to dial these in as we build our comp. Okay, the next thing we'll probably notice that is kind of a glaring error is that we should probably desaturate these a touch. I might even desaturate these before my grade node. So we'll just bump the saturation down. So the reason that desaturating before using your grade node helps a lot is because when we desaturate something that's super saturated, we basically take values from the red channel and shuffle them into the other channels. That gives us more information to play with when we're trying to say make it more green or make it more blue. If there's no information in the green or blue channels, if we try and adjust the blue channel, we'll get kind of nothing because we're trying to adjust nothing. So desaturating before doing your color correction node can be a neat trick. We'll be continuing to try and get those closer and closer throughout the comp. So let's leave it there for now and move on to probably the next most glaring issue, which is that these flags here are very sharp compared to our background here. So we'll use the focus in our background here to inform how focused these flags should be. So let's take a look at our plate to see where our flag should be sharpest. Probably the sharpest point in our plate is somewhere around her dress here in Z space. And then we'll follow that focus plane upward to our CG element to determine where it should be sharpest. And we'll say it's right here. We'll use an iConvolve tool. This was created by a guy named Adrian. He's made a lot of other cool stuff too. So let's use this control mask to determine where we want our flags to be sharpest. Sharpest right here. And as we go out, it will get progressively softer. So you're probably already noticing that this control mat is doing the opposite of what we want it to be doing. The areas closest to the center are the most defocused, whereas we want the areas closest to the center to be the sharpest or the least defocused. So we just need to invert our control mask here. We'll do that using an invert node. If we take a look at our control mask before and after, we'll hit A here in order to see the alpha, and then we can AB using 1, 2, and as you can see, these are inverted. So now let's take a look at this area that we were keyed in on earlier. The focus of this background is relatively defocused, whereas the defocus of our CG element here is massively defocused. So we'll want to address that just by adjusting the max size here to kind of match it to this background here. We'll also probably use our intuition to know that these should be actually less defocused than this background element here because they're closer to the focus plane. So the more OCD among you will probably also be screaming to yourself about this black edge here, which is very ugly and we need to fix. We'll do that using an edge extend tool. And let's go back to one of our prior principles. We'll use 1B Google stuff and say how to extend edges in Nuke. If you're not familiar with Nukepedia, Nukepedia is basically a database of user-created tools that was often used on a day-to-day basis by compositors in the industry. So we can just go to really any of these tools. Edge extend, there's probably 15 or 20 of these on Nukepedia, maybe even more. But the one we'll use today is called Lens Edge Extend. connect our RGB to our source. Lens is what this gizmo calls alpha. We also will probably need to recopy our alpha here to our original stream and then see what we get. And right off the bat, we're getting an improvement to our result. So here's before and after. So what this is doing is just taking our RGB pixels and pushing them outward according to the alpha. Okay, one thing we also might try is to bump up the black point so that we're not getting such crazy black on the string edges. And then we might even be able to cheat our edges a bit more so that the black isn't so noticeable, and we'll call that fine. And the last thing we might notice on these is that our chromatic aberration on our plate is not matching the chromatic aberration in our CG element, and we want to fix that. We want to match the lensing of our CG element to the lensing of our plate. There is a handful of chromatic aberration tools in the survival toolkit, so we'll go chromatic aberration, and there's a few here. If these don't work for you, you can also go on to Google and go chromatic aberration Nukepedia, and then there's probably going to be another 15 or 20 of these. So the one that I ended up grabbing was called K chromatic, I think, and we can just hop in and start kind of messing around with this. So we'll notice here that this is producing a result that kind of resembles our plate, but you'll also notice that this turquoise color, while it is close-ish to this color, it's on the wrong side. We have this blue element on the right side, this orange element on the left side. So maybe we will just kind of mess around with our controls here. It's possible that we might also just want to mix this in a little bit. Okay, this comp is obviously incomplete, but you'll be using these techniques for every step of the process. And that brings us to another skill set that we're also going to be using pretty relentlessly throughout the process. Always assume we can improve our comp until time runs out. And so here's the comp that I came up with, and time ran out pretty quick for me. So there's definitely a lot to critique in here, and that's going to be what we're going to do now. Learn how to really be critical of our own work so that we can take steps to improve our own work. So the first thing we'll notice here is that these could definitely be darker, right? We talked about this earlier. These should be in shadow. Another thing we'll notice is that our white balance on these looks a little bit off. These are looking kind of pink to me, whereas this area is looking turquoise-ish by contrast. Another thing I'll notice is that we have some kind of gnarly lines right here that are coming off of the key. So we could probably use either an edge extension tool or paint these in a little bit more, or just get our alpha a little bit tighter. We'll also notice some retime artifacts here. This lamp gets kind of pushed in by the boy. And then we'll also notice some kind of gnarly keying issues here. There's actually more in here that we could probably dig into, but I just wanted to demonstrate the principle of this is my comp. It's not perfect by any stretch, and I need to be able to acknowledge that so that I can make my work better and better and better. And it's not that we should always be depressed that our work is always wrong. We should always have confidence in our ability to critique our own work, and that's the only way that we can improve our work and make our work better, is if we're able to be really harsh on ourselves. Our final principle of compositing is find mentorship where you can, and that can be in many different forms. Probably one of the better forms is to find someone at work who you can just ask a lot of questions to, even if it's not a formal mentor-mentee relationship. Just try and absorb as much information from them as you can. If you're not working at a studio, there are other ways to find mentorship, and that can be online. You can find people on the Foundry forums who know a lot. You can also find people on the Discord who are very willing to share their information with you, and that includes me. I started this, and there are lots of people who are very active on here who know a lot, who can help you work through your comps. And then you can also find a more formal relationship with a mentor by going to Access VFX, accessvfx.org. And on Access VFX, you can be paired with a mentor who knows a lot about compositing or VFX in general. I'm a mentor on here, and there are lots of other mentors who are very forthcoming with their wisdom on, firstly, just industry stuff, how to get a job at a studio, but also the technical stuff of how to improve your compositing work. Okay, so we'll say that we've done our compositing work on some of our shots, and it's time to implement those shots back into our edit. So we'll hop over back to Nuke Studio here, and we will try and import our VFX work back into our Nuke Studio project so that we can view it as an edit and so that we can critique our own work. This would work also if you had, say, 5 other compositors working with you, and they were working within the correct Nuke scripts and output structure. You could import their work into Nuke Studio too. We'll just highlight our entire edit here, and we will choose build track from export structure. And then we will find the Nuke write node that we specified prior, and that's the output path that all of our Nuke scripts are going to be writing to. And then we'll select that and build. And let's call this Foundry 2. In real time, time up here is this new track, Foundry 2, getting populated with all of our VFX work that we've completed on these shots, as long as it was rendered using that specified write node. If you are working at a studio that did not have access to Nuke Studio, it can take literally hours to find all the correct paths, put them into your timeline, trim them to the correct handles, make sure they're lining up with the offline, etc. And that's something that has just been completed for us by Nuke Studio just in the time that I've been talking. And so this will enable us to export all of our shots either as a full edit, or it can even be exported as individual shots, say for a colorist to do their color work on. And in order to do that, we would just highlight our entire edit here. We would click export, and then we would process as shots, and we can export individual MOVs for each and every shot, or process as a sequence. We could export as literally any type of file format, or even as an XML as well. Okay, so that wraps up our quick demo on how to get started with this practice material. If you have any questions about this, I created this Discord server specifically for questions, and it has since grown into a general Nuke knowledge forum. And I look forward to seeing all these shots on your reels, and good luck and happy compositing.